The following episode contains or may contain spoilers. So if you're spoiler sensitive, maybe beware.
Yeah, you sensitive people.
Get out.
No, get in. Welcome to the Fantom Zone. Two fans, one podcast, and a sea of comics. I'm Noah.
And I'm Kayla.
Kayla came back from Scotland, and she sounds like a man.
Mm-hmm.
No, Kayla is not with us this week.
It's very sad.
She left us forever to go to Scotland and fulfill her dreams or some, stupid stuff like that.
I feel really bad because I still don't know what she's doing. I assume it's fighting the English with blue paint on her face.
With dragons, I'm assuming, and lots of alcohol. No, she is in grad school, so she has more important things to do than talk about comic and nerd shit with us than to be here.
I don't believe that there's more important stuff, but fine.
I mean, that's true. But we figured we would do an episode that she's heard enough about from both Jared and I, specifically myself.
Yeah, she gives you a lot of shit for bringing this up.
Yeah, so I figured do it while she's on vacation, essentially. So we are going to be talking about Saga. So it's kind of like a deep dive and more of like why you need to read this and why we love this series so much.
We've never done this before.
What?
We've never taken a story, like just a single, like linear, long-standing story and just like done a whole episode about it. One of the reasons we haven't is because it's so rare that the three of us have all like read the same long ass story.
Yeah, that's true.
So this is like, hopefully the next time we all do this, we'll all be here and we'll have read one story.
I hope.
Yes.
So yeah, a lot of us read a lot of different things, so it's hard for all three of us to have read the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just happens Jared and I have read this series all the way through and multiple times, but by no means am I an expert, and I don't think Jared's necessarily an expert either. So don't get mad at us if we get some things wrong, because this story is huge.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things about stories like this. It's self-contained, so it's from Image Comics.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one story. There's nothing else to pull from. There's a mythos only on to itself.
Yes.
It's not like a DC universe or Marvel where we can kind of, conclude things in a way of like, oh, well, this happened, so this must have happened. But no, it's just one singular story, so there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, it's actually kind of cool because we get to talk about stuff because it is one self-contained story with like self-contained or like artists that maintain through the entire work.
Mm-hmm.
We can actually like kind of delve into that. Like when we do like Spider-Man, we can't really just talk about the writer of Spider-Man.
Yeah, because we did a writers episode, but it was focusing on particular writers, and most of I think the one that I did was Brian K. Vaughan, which wrote this story, and I think I talked about this story on that one, obviously. But it is hard with artists specifically because you can go through all their works, but depending on the story they're writing or working on with the writer, the artwork can be completely different.
Yes.
So it's harder to talk about artists than it is to talk about writers, especially in an audio format. So
yeah, we're gonna run into just that issue. But anyway, so Saga.
Yeah, Fiona Staples is the artist for this. She is phenomenal. I mean, most of her work that I've seen her do, she has done stuff for DC and Marvel as well, and some other publishers. But I mean, I think Saga is probably my favorite of hers by far because you see so much of it.
I haven't really seen her outside of this book.
Oh, that's so sad. I mean, she's done a lot of like variant covers and stuff like that, and worked on some of the books. But
I want to see more of her stuff for sure. And it's not like I want Saga to end anytime soon. It's on hiatus now, right? Well, that's what.
Yeah. So apparently, there's 54 issues currently, and then they went on an indefinite hiatus, which that fucking sucks. And Brian K. Vaughan said that they are halfway done with the story. So 108 issues, which is a lot of issues. That's a huge story.
Yeah.
But also to know when it's ending.
Well, it's a story called Saga, so if it was short, it would be super weird.
Yeah, but I want it to like keep going. I want it to be like Star Wars where they just keep pumping out.
Look, if this is 54, and it's going to be, 108? 108? That's longer than most epics. in
yeah.
comics. Like, so I think Preacher's like 66 issues. I think that's right. You can get back to me, listeners. But like, so it's going to still feel insanely long if they make it.
Yeah.
As far as, you know.
I mean, there's already, with just 54 issues alone, there's so much in this story already. So for them to double that and what has happened so far, especially leaving off on that 9th volume or the 54th issue, I have no idea where they're going from here.
But yeah, but what I was going to say is I really want to see her outside of this, the artist Fiona, because when I was reading Invincible, it was the same thing, Robert Kirkman, and for the most part, Ryan Ottley, and it's just those two doing their thing for this entire run, and it took me so long to adjust to Ryan Ottley on stuff that wasn't Invincible.
Yeah.
It would be like, oh, so Spider-Man's in the Invincible universe now. Oh, that's okay. That's cool.
But that is funny though. I mean, you can see, I mean, it's like a writer. You can tell who the writer is and you can hear their voice. So the artist, even though they're drawing more spandex on somebody than the other one, you can kind of see, like, a lot of times it's like with the feet or the way they draw their head and stuff like that. So, or lack of drawing feet. And so,
So, Rob Liefeld sucks. Anyway, so we have Fiona. What's her last name?
Staples.
I want to say it's because Fiona Apple. It keeps messing me up.
Completely different.
I know. I'm like, it's not Fiona Apple. We know that. And then Brian K. Vaughan, we're very familiar with.
Yes.
The Prince of Poignant. The Sultan of Sad.
Yes.
The Viceroy of Killjoy. I'm proud of that one.
Yeah. So just for some publication stuff, Kayla's not here, so I will not do a good job on this. So it's first started in March 2012, which was a long time ago. And for them to still go on a year hiatus, it's like, we're going to be well into the 2020s when this stuff ends. So March 14th, 2012 is when it first came out. It's won a bunch of different awards, like the Eisner, the Harvey Award, the Hugo Award, Best Graphic Novel Story. It's won awards all over the place.
Saga right now is like the current Watchmen in a way. Yes. Where it's like, if you had to point to the comic book series that's unequivocally and like, by the entire community, like just in unison, is like, what's the best one? What's the most critically acclaimed one? It's got to be.
Yeah, and I think it is funny because you have people that read Marvel and DC pretty much almost strictly, and they do know about this story. And it's interesting that you say that too, that this is like the one that they point to, just like Watchmen was for the longest time, and still kind of is in some communities. But it's independent works like this, and it's works that are very self-contained, that are usually the ones that are pointed to, that are like, this is amazing. And I feel like maybe because there's not a lot of history, or people can't say like, well, they wouldn't do this because 30 years ago they did this. So I think that's an interesting.
Yeah. Well, no, I think that's a good point. And I also think it's worth mentioning, because you mentioned it's this standalone series or whatever. We don't get a lot of these in a generation where it's this dominating story, because this is a superhero medium. There are other comic book styles and think westerns, horrors, and stuff like that. But superheroes are the thing that crush it. And when they don't, when there's something that doesn't, Saga is one of the best selling comic series currently. That tells you something about the caliber of the story. When something, this unpopular genre in the medium, is all of a sudden like the big story.
Oh yeah, when Volume 9 came out, I remember going to get it, and I had never had trouble finding this story before in the volumes. And when that came out, I went to 4 different comic shops. Yeah. And they were completely sold out. And it made me happy, but also was like, oh, okay, I guess people are reading this now. And if you go in the comic shops, you'll see they have like 10 copies of like 1 through 9 of each volume, because they're just selling so much of it, which is great. And it's not a superhero story. Like, there's some elements where you could see that they played around with it, like the Will, how he looks in his like cape and
that's a good
with
point.
Mask and stuff like that. But it is definitely not. It's a fantasy space opera that's like Star Wars, but not like Star Wars.
There's no, we can get into it in a little bit, I think, about the comparisons to Star Wars, but like, it is true that if you had to compare it to one thing, it would be Star Wars.
Yeah, that's just because it takes place in space.
But
and there's aliens.
Exactly, but it doesn't feel derivative. And it's both sciencey and magic-y, obviously. But okay, so that's kind of the infomercial for Saga. And it's true that like if you haven't read this at this point, we really think you should pick up that first trade.
Like, I will keep talking about it unless all of you say you have not read it.
But for the purposes of listening to this, go pick up the first trade. If you haven't, you're probably a fan of it already. But if you're not, pause, read that first trailer, and now let's talk about it, because really we're going to get into the sort of the story and things a little bit more now.
Yeah,
And-
with this type of story, even just mentioning some of the characters' names and then like the sentence after it is going to spoil a lot of this. And we always have the opener like spoiler sensitive and stuff. So like we're going to talk about spoilers in this, and we really want to make sure you read this.
Well, why don't you go ahead and sort of lay out what's Saga about? Like, what's the basic story?
So even though it's a very big, encompassing galactic story, it really focuses on one particular family. The opening to it is Alana, which she's one of the protagonists, and Marco, and she's giving birth. So that is the opening to this entire series, and it shows everything. It shows them taking Hazel, which is their kid, bloody, and he's like super happy about it. But then you find out they're getting chased.
Yes.
So I believe the first couple
babies being born into but they're being chased.
Yeah. And so I think at the beginning it was like the wreath, which is where Marco's from. Mm-hmm. It's typically people that have horns and they use magic, and I think they speak blue, and that's their language. And then landfall, which that's where I was going to say Fiona. That's not her name. That's the artist. Alana, that's where she's from. They have wings, and they more are military driven and use technology.
Yeah. So it's two enemy civilizations,
which is funny because they revolve around each other. There's a moon
one
and the
revolves
planet.
around the other.
Yeah. So Marco is from the wreath, which is the moon that revolves around landfall.
Yeah.
Whereas Alana's from.
Which is such a cute name, by the way.
What?
It's wreath because it's a circle around the thing, right?
I never put
get
that
it
together.
Like the moon is a wreath. Beautiful. And then landfall, obviously the land, like it's such dramatic. It's just, anyway, it's well written.
So at the beginning it paints that picture like they've been at war for this long. Mm-hmm. They hate each other, and obviously Marco and Alana having birth to this child is completely not okay.
Yes.
So immediately you're introduced to the governing powers and these other people, these bounty hunters, finding out that this has happened, and they either want to kill the child or kill Marco and Alana or get the child at any cost. And that's when you're introduced to the will.
Ooh. So before we get there, so we have star-crossed lovers.
Yes.
It's a Romeo and Juliet story, but doubled down on that and even more extreme because they have a child.
I was going to say because they're not whiny little brats.
That too. And they're like, well, we're not going to kill each other. We're just going to fight and run or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have that. And then you're introduced to like more of the world and how it works and the governing powers and why it's not okay. And so the Will, he's a bounty hunter, and he's human, I guess. Like, I don't think it really explains where he's from. There's just characters that look like humans, and then there's a fuck ton of aliens.
It's true. And it's actually another similarity to Star Wars, where there are aliens and there are these humanoid things like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars or whatever. But it's not like we expect they're from Earth or Homo sapiens or Terrans at all.
Yeah.
I think it's just like, well, they're going to make some characters that are people looking.
That look like us. Yeah. So, and then you're introduced to his companion, Lion Cat, which he's this teal, giant sphinx-looking cat that can detect when people are lying by saying lying. So he's amazing. Just the aesthetic of those two together is it's amazing. I love it so much. So to
point, and I'm glad you mentioned obviously the Will. We're going to talk about all the characters a little bit more extensively later, but one thing is to say just how does the story function, and I think the basic format, the plot is it's like a travel story. It's like the family are constantly running away and running into different kinds of characters that are either trying to murder them or they pick up allies along the way.
Yeah. I mean, it's just an on-the-run story from a family that shouldn't be.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's what brings it for the Romeo and Juliet. That's what brings it to the Star Wars thing, because they're going across the galaxy and planets and stuff like that. So you have them on the run, them not knowing these bounty hunters and everybody are after them until they run into them. And along the way, you actually get to meet like Marco's family, like his mom and dad, which rest in peace, dad. And then like his mom, and then they have to deal with like, you're in a relationship with our enemy, but we also love the kid, we think, because she has horns and wings.
Yes. So I think what's really cool, worth mentioning here, is like how the story concept is just so like pregnant with all these different possibilities. No pun intended about the pregnancy or whatever. Yeah, thank you. But because, you have a war going on, right? And you see this along the story. There are all these different sort of characters that we run into that have different kinds of like war-related or political motivations.
Right.
And they don't need to be that connected to the family. They're just out there doing their like battle shit or whatever. And then connected to that, as you mentioned, these two great empires that are warring both have reasons to be super pissed that there's this new, what do we like? I don't want to say anything offensive
Hybrid
here.
kid?
Yeah, that's nice. A hybrid child out there that they both hate. So they're sending all kinds of agents. So we get all kinds of bounty hunters. I love, by the way, the motif that they're all declarative article, like they're all the something.
Oh yeah, like the will,
So
the brand.
Will, yeah. The stalk, the lamp. I don't know. There's been a lot of them.
I mean, probably.
Yeah.
The contract, I think, was one that was mentioned or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, there's very much like hard ways this story in this universe works.
Yes.
So like with the bounty hunters, you got that. And then you have the way that the government works and stuff like that. And then you're also introduced to other governments that are allied with some of them, but also work on their own agenda. So like their Robot Kingdom, where Prince Robot the fourth?
I think fourth.
The fourth comes in, which he plays a big part throughout the story.
Yeah, his species of like animatronic or like not animatronic, like android, like
so to paint a picture, if you haven't read it or you need a refresher, they are gray humanoid-looking things, except their heads are televisions. And it will show like their emotions or like if they're conveying like, I don't know, something's explosive or like they're really mad, it will show like an atom bomb on their face.
What an awesome device that is, just from a comic sort of communication standpoint of having, you can see the character's internal monologue or thoughts just by a visual on their face.
Yeah, it sounds awful.
Yeah, and it usually is because we haven't really mentioned this, and this is a very graphic comic book.
It is very explicit. Like it will show sex scenes and actually show everything.
A lot of balls, a lot of vaginas, you know,
a lot of robot things,
a lot of dragon semen for some reason.
Oh, there was.
Yes.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, it sounds like something I would have just made up, but no, it's totally dragon jizz shows up.
Yeah, so I mean, that is the basic concept of this story: is these two lovers that shouldn't be in love, fell in love, have a kid, they're on the run because they had this kid. And they run into people along the way.
And I want to say, I mean, what I think is interesting about the story structure, away from it just being this fun run and gun kind of like, because they're always on the move. You always get these new settings, these beautiful landscapes, and Fiona Staples' art is so good at creating these like, because her art is like very precise in certain ways, and then very kind of loose, and I don't know, it's hard to describe.
She knows how. I really appreciate how she knows how to convey motion really well.
Yeah, definitely,
and like really pivotal scenes because. You know, a lot of times you'll just get like the lines from a fist moving to show it's moving, but the way she does it, it's like for some reason can see it do it. Like, I don't know. It's really weird.
I think at times it creates this almost like dreamy kind of feel or whatever. And like, I think that's really good at like creating these evocative landscapes and different settings and stuff. So, and I think that's great about having this kind of open world, but we don't really know that much about it in the onset. And
you're finding out about it as you go.
Yes.
A lot like Star Wars and stories like that. Where
or
it's
Star
like,
Trek in a way. Star Trek. You know, like Boldly Go where.
Yeah, it's like they meet up with some type of alien race or something, or ghosts and stuff like that. And it's just like a normal thing.
Yeah, you have to accept if there's a whole planet, it's like, oh, they're all like half zebra, half like clownfish. You just be like, well, that's what that world is.
Which I think there is some characters like that.
But the other thing that I think is interesting about having this like run and gun on the road style or story structure is you don't know who's going to be important as they show up, and something happens in this story which I think is like very contemporary, like Walking Dead, Invincible sort of stuff. People die a lot.
Yes.
And like very suddenly and in very striking, traumatic ways.
Yeah, and it's interesting too with stories like this where so many paths are going one direction and a lot of characters intercross that you don't think would. And then some of the characters that kill some of the characters come out of nowhere. And you don't expect it and stuff like that. I mean, this story constantly keeps you on your toes because it's constantly they're on the run. I mean, there's really no moments. Like, there'll be like maybe an issue where they're like in one spot for a little bit and they start getting comfortable, and then something else happens.
Absolutely.
So it's constantly just keeps moving.
It's a very fragile state that everything exists in, and I don't want to give it away anything huge or anything like that. Like, obviously, you're acquainted with the series. If you're listening to this, probably. But I don't want to say anything major. But let's just say some major characters die relatively early. And it sends a message that sort of like, no one's safe. And what I think is wonderful about that, it's not a horror story. So at the same time, it lulls you into a very false sense of security that you're just in this normal, like, Mad Maxian comedy action thing that's happening, and then we forget, somebody's head can just get blown off, even though we've spent the last 4 issues intensely getting to know their character.
I mean, I call it like the Walking Dead effect, because like, especially the TV show, is because like you'll have like a whole episode dedicated to this character that really never mattered, and it's like, oh, they're gonna die, and then they'll die. So it's like, you know, you'll get that. But with this, it's like you introduce these characters that kind of come in and out of the story. There's a lot of back and forth between like the Marco and Alana story, and then like the Will, and then Prince Robot. And then when some paths intersect, or like you'll go back to them and it's like, oh shit, what the fuck is happening here?
I think we should probably get into characters a little bit, and we'll kind of come back into some more stuff. But I think I just want to say, while we're talking, I'm like, man, Brian K. Vaughan is so good
at writing.
Because if you think about like all of the things that he's got to be good at, and then fit them together in these complementary ways. So like, you know, like I said, he's got this really interesting plot structure that he's managed to develop. The world is super interesting, and it feels original. And
very
still somehow,
original.
Yeah, it's like familiar in that we understand its genre.
Well, we understand like we're accepting of a lot of things that happen in it. Like, you know, it's alien and stuff like that. So like, okay, I will expect like giant women heads with just legs.
Well, and what is crazy to me is that it's sort of like the Star Wars parallels. It's so interesting because it shares all these facts, but you don't think about it being like Star Wars because it feels very original. So you're not like, you know, it's like in a lot of fantasy, like a lot of Dungeons and Dragons stuff, you're like, oh, this is just Tolkien. They've just rewritten Tolkien. Great. This doesn't feel like that with other sci-fi. This feels very original, but still somehow you're like, oh, it does have these different tropes. It does fit into this genre. Anyway, but so let's talk a little bit about character, because that's another thing that Brian K. Vaughan has managed, you know, to and Fiona Staples in her own way.
Get you invested heavily in these very well-written characters.
Three-dimensional, meaty, dilemma-heavy, laden
you through
characters.
hell for even picking up the book.
I mean that. Yeah, it's this. This is a bit contrived, but it's like the Stephen King effect, also of like, I'm going to make these characters so compelling and original and lifelike, and then I'm going to drag them through hell. You know, but so as we mentioned, like the core of this story, at least up until maybe recently, has revolved around these 2 main characters.
3.
What's that? Yeah,
Hazel.
you're right. Hazel is and actually, I always forget that
she's narrating.
She's the narrator. Yeah. So that's its own thing.
Yeah, it will, like in the beginning usually of like the trades, or depending on the issue, and definitely at the end of the trades, she's narrating some part of it. Yeah. So that's something to keep in mind.
That's a good point. But in a more conventional sense, the 2 main characters are, of course, Alana and Marco. And we've actually talked about them in our Mother and Father's Day episode.
And Mother's Day.
So this will kind of be a recap of that a little bit, because we did really flesh them out pretty well in that episode.
Yeah, so I mean, you can listen to those episodes to get more on them, or like a different, because I'm obviously not going to focus too much on her being a mother in this one, even though that's why she's in this situation. But I mean, I guess we can talk about Alana. Yeah. Because she's like the first character you're introduced to. So she was part of the Landfall Coalition. And do you remember actually why she wasn't in the Coalition anymore?
No.
So she was ordered to detonate a bomb on a bridge that had like a lot of enemies on it, but they were innocent enemies. And even though it would save her people, she hesitated to do it. She did it ultimately anyway, which was a very shocking thing to see, that she actually did it, like this protagonist of the story, because you find this out later in the issues. So she detonates it, kills all those people, but she actually gets discharged for hesitating. So that just shows how strict they are with this. And then that's when she's sentenced to duty on the Cleve, which is kind of like their like concentration camps
or like Siberia prisons. Or something.
Yeah. And that's where she actually runs into Marco.
and it's interesting you mentioned that. So she shows some sort of moral conscience, but she does go through with it.
Yes.
Whereas the yin to her yang, so to speak, Marco is a conscious objector.
Yes.
So we find out over a period of time, he wasn't just some like academic-y conscious objector. He was a serious, battle-tested warrior who's drenched in the blood of the enemy, who then becomes a conscious objector. So they both have these really sort of dark, violent pasts, but have both expressed a kind of like moral courage and really like cynicism towards the larger war.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting because they've actually argued about it, because regardless that they're from different places and they love each other, they still have their ideals. I think their meeting and kind of like their meet cute is actually pretty cute or whatever. So like there was a secret book club that she would have, and she'd actually read to him while he was doing manual labor. She despised him at first. Obviously, she couldn't stand the people with the horns. But she started reading to him, and then they started joking, and then the rest is history. But I always thought that was pretty cute, because you find this stuff out as you're reading the story. It's not like this is the beginning. It's like, no, you're going to see the birth and then a lot of death and destruction, and then you'll see the cute stuff.
You're way better at remembering these details, by the way. This is all coming back when you say it, but it's definitely, that's
I remember the weird shit or the things that I thought was like super cute or whatever, but then like some of the big stuff, I'm like, I don't remember.
Well, I think it's really interesting, their relationship in this way to like the war and ideals, because they both agree that it's awful and it's to be avoided, and they want to make have their own family and like their separate peace, so to speak.
Well, do you remember? So when she finds out she's pregnant, she's terrified because it's happened before.
Yes,
and they don't survive. Usually, the reproducing with the two different species,
that's right,
doesn't work.
They're not supposed to be viable.
Yeah, and this is the first time that a baby has survived more than like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So everybody's like, we need this baby.
Yeah. So they understand the significance from the get.
Yes.
But like I said, I think it's interesting that the way she expresses this stuff is like, yes, you're right. The war is wrong. We have to have our integrity, our morals and stuff like that. But Marco will just straight up do shit for principles that is just wholly unrealistic. He'll just, like for a lot of this, he wants to be a pacifist. He doesn't want to fight at all. Even well after, like they're running away and there was like bounty hunters trying to like, kill him or whatever. He still feels weird about taking up the magical sword or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really cool thing about like Marco's people from the Wreath and Marco is they use magic.
Yeah.
So it's a really striking image to see, because Alana usually uses guns or like blunt objects, and then Marco sometimes will use magic. I feel like he did it a lot more in the middle, but he's like kind of gone away from that.
Well, they were smart about Brian K. Vaughan was smart about like how the system of magic was going to work. Her stuff is super easy. Landfall stuff, it's guns, that kind of thing. But rather than them being these sort of like spellcasters, just since we're a comic book podcast, we might as well get a little bit of powers, but like rather than being kind of like open-ended spellcasters, it's way more like the Doctor Strange movie adaptation, where it's sort of like they use weapons that then have like some magical like abilities or something like that. So it's it's
like a cross between like that and then like alchemy, and like it's a lot of give and take with their magic.
And it's more like combat mages rather than being like Harry Potter sorcerer kind of characters.
There's combat wizards.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is like they're
Shut
like
your mouth. You don't know what you're talking about.
True, I'm out of my depth. But they're way more bound by conventional stuff, whatever. But
yeah, I mean his growing up, Marco, just to get into him a little bit. So his parents are Clara and Bar, with like 2 R's for, I guess, alien reasons.
Bar,
alien reasons. And he grew up like normal. Like he knew that there was a battle and stuff, but his parents actually took him to a battle.
Glenn has 2 N's in it, Glenn, so it's like
an alien. Anybody named Glenn with 2 N's is an alien.
Yeah, fair enough.
But they took him to a battle and saw the repercussions of it, and they do that to make, I guess, their children and the people from the Wreath like appreciate the sacrifice of everything. But I mean, it worked with him for a while, but then he started to see that all of it was just nonsense.
Yeah.
I mean, he also was in the military as well, and hence why he got captured. He was also engaged to this other character that gets introduced, Gwendolyn. I love Gwendolyn so much. She's just such a strong character and a badass. Visually too, like if you've never read this before,
she's a black woman with horns. Just
look her up.
Powerful.
She looks amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, she obviously is not married to her anymore or engaged to her.
She ends up being one of those, like, filling out the cast of characters. It's another form of, like, not just bounty hunters or political agents, but their past. And so there's sort of a lot of characters, sort of, as Kayla would love, swan in and out. It's like Kayla's word, swanning in and out. But yeah, and so we mentioned Hazel, who more recently becomes a real character.
She's a baby. Yeah, she's a baby through most of the part, and then now she's like talking and like
she's intelligent and precocious and has a general sense of the consequences or the significance.
And she just, I mean, she's kind of like, I don't want to say typical, but she's a very well written kid, but she has all the traits of like an innocent kid and like kind of asking funny questions and then just having like a heart of gold and like, you know, not understanding why we can't hang out with these type of people or whatever. It's really interesting to see because you have like Marco and Alana, which are very strong personalities, and like, no, you can't do that. And Hazel's like, well, I'm going to do it anyway.
It's interesting to me too, like how her normal is like everything that's going on is just her normal.
Oh yeah.
Whereas like it's the most grandiose, you know, dramatic situation for everybody else. The stakes are very high, but she's always lived in this magical tree rocket, which is like how they get around.
Yeah, they got that kind of later on in the story. I think it's called like the tree house or something like that. Yeah, it's amazing. I love their ship. It's a tree.
Yeah,
it's like a wooden. It's so cool.
It's very good. I mean, there's no reason it needs to be that. They just thought of a very cool visual.
Yeah,
to like try. You know what I mean?
I also think it's interesting with Hazel is that she's getting raised by so many different people. Like, not just her parents, because, I mean, not to spoil anything, but Prince Robot eventually ends up joining them on their side, and he helps, like, babysit her and everything.
We should get into him now, then.
We can.
Well, I did want to say, as we were talking about this, like, it just reminded me, there's this tree that's their rocket ship, and I think one of the reasons that the visuals and this thing doesn't remind me of anything, like Star Wars or whatever, is because it shares as much with like kids books and poetry books as it does like more like, you
comic
know,
books.
Yeah. You know, like this idea of like, like the Little Prince that, there's so many pieces of this that remind me of that, or maybe even like the more whimsical episodes of Rick and Morty or something like that. But anyway, so you mentioned the Prince Robot, who, I mean, he's one of the most interesting characters in contemporary comics. Very much so. Yeah. And I think so. To give the somebody who's not familiar with him, the novice or whatever, we mentioned he's the TV of those
TV people.
Yeah. And do they say the name of those aliens?
They're just robots. They're from the Robot Kingdom.
That's it. So the Robot characters or whatever. So he begins being a emissary of the Landfall Union.
Yes.
You know,
they're kind of like the suppliers for the technology for Landfall. So they have like this weird like upper hand authoritative type thing. I mean, it's kind of like most stories where it's like you have the army and like the government, but then you have the person funding the government. So like they can kind of make them do what they want.
So they're like Switzerland in World War II or something. They're like their own entity. They're clearly, they have Nazi gold. But anyway,
yeah. So I mean, it's essentially it for him. I mean, he's on that side. He also hears about this whole Hazel bullshit or whatever. Well, to him, it's bullshit. And he's trying to find information. So you have like the Will, which is a bounty hunter going after, which I believe the people from the Wreath had sent after. Hired the Will. And then obviously Prince Robot or Sir Robot, which he's called later on, is going after them as well because his father told him to, because he was like, no, we need to be the ones that get this or whatever. So it's kind of like a weird, like who can get there first type thing. Because you have all these different governments and powers and races trying to get to them.
And anybody that gets involved in their situation from their conventional circumstances, their life just ends up being put into complete disarray.
Oh yeah.
So it's that case with Prince Robot where he is more or less conventional, though they make him out like a Gestapo agent, like a kind of like
Definitely
Hans Landa character.
Yeah, in the beginning, he's very much like following orders.
Yeah,
I'll do this and stuff like that. But you can tell he's kind of complicated in a way because I remember he was like interviewing people at the Cleve to find out information about them, and then like it goes to his. Like, I remember the scene for some reason. It goes to him like sitting on the toilet, kind of like contemplating like wanting to do this and like. Is this worth it? He's just kind of being lazy about it. He's like, I don't really care about this type of thing. Yeah, I just think it's really interesting. And he's also married, and then she's pregnant, which I guess they get pregnant just like people do.
In a gross way. Well, I mean, it is funny because you're right. He is this weird, disaffected, very cynical character. And most of the characters in this, like that are our focus, are they represent certain organizations or groups or something like that. But they're all very like eye-rolly about the legitimacy or like what's really going on in those groups or something like that. And eventually, and I think we don't want to get too much in the weeds, but like he joins their family essentially after he burns all his bridges on accident, trying to hold up some sort of his own integrity. He becomes, and then he's also becomes like a mess.
Yeah, well, he becomes a father, essentially, with true. Squire. That's what they call him. He's this little tiny robot kid or whatever. And I think that changes something in him. And like, so now he's pretty much kidnapped his kid from like his wife in the robot kingdom and stuff. So he's like, oh, I guess I'm going to join these guys on the run with their kid too.
And they cut, well, I don't know, there's a better word for this, but they cut him off.
Yes.
They excommunicate him essentially. And what I find really fascinating about, because he's kind of there's one way to read this where it's like he is this person who's had this traumatic or life-changing experience, and then he just changes. But I think in certain ways, like it's sort of like before he's just sort of doing his job. He's just kind of in the context that he's supposed to be in, and then the world changes around him. And, then he acts what appear because he's friends with the protagonists in a more moral way or something like that. So I think he's an interesting, like, just character study.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's great. Well, and then to, I guess, go into a more complicated character. So the Will, just to give a little, and I'll just really briefly touch on him.
He's like the breakout star.
He really is. Well, I mean, but also you love him, you hate him, you love him, and you hate him like constantly.
No, it's very true.
So right off the bat, he's striking. He has that Lion Cat, which has become a breakout hit of the series. I love Lion Cat. Visually, I even have some figures of Lion Cat because he's amazing.
We forgot to say, Lion Cat is also a big ass cat.
No, I already said that. Okay, he's a giant teal Sphinx cat.
But he's got the lying stuff. He will also just rip your face off.
Oh yeah.
So anyway,
yeah. He's definitely like a partner with him. He's not just like a little animal companion. So he's a freelancer. So he finds out. So on his way to go get Marco and Alana, he finds out that his ex, the Stalk, which is a terrifying character and creature,
spider lady.
Yeah, it's like a giant woman spider thing
that's like made very voluptuous.
Yeah, she's made and like has all her parts and
she's got no arms but some couple of titties hanging out.
Oh, that's right. She doesn't have arms. Yeah, she has titties. She has boobs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's really weird to see that was his ex. He finds out about that. So and this is where the reason why I'm saying this is to just kind of paint a richer picture of this character's complicatedness. So when he finds that out, he goes to this his planet. I think it was like Sextillion or something. It's a sex slave planet essentially. Like you go there to have sex with all types, like children, everything.
If Bangkok was a planet, it would be this.
God, shut up.
It's true.
So they're not all like that.
No, okay.
Anyway, so he goes there, and while he's there, he actually kind of gets a soft spot for this little girl, Sophie, and just as a little slave girl, she's a sex slave there. And there's like this mama pimp called, it's like Mama Sun, I think.
Mama-san?
Yeah, Mama Sun.
Yeah.
And so the Will tries to like smuggle her off. She has this like elixir and security stuff in her that like tells when she's obviously going where she's not supposed to go. And if she goes off planet, she has this stuff inside of her that will immediately kill her. So it's like, well, you guys really got your shit on lock there, apparently. So he ends up spending like hundreds of thousands of like credits, which is money in intergalactic currency, I guess, across the board. He spends all this money to save this girl that like prior to that, you would think that he would have no, I don't know, I guess care for that because I mean, he's on a planet with a bunch of sex slaves and stuff, but it's like just that particular girl really won him over.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Well, dig this, because I think the Will's got this fascinating character arc. Because he begins in a very like kind of Han Solo at the beginning of Star Wars way, like so kind of merciless. And he's a bounty hunter, not a smuggler, but like just sort of like doesn't give a shit about anybody. And he's a consummate professional. We forgot to mention, by the way, his main weapon, which I just think bears repeating. It's a lance, right? So freelancer, so it's sort of pun laden. But and the way it works, it's sort of this like foil, like fencing foil or like lance, but it shoots out like a snake and it stabs people.
Yeah,
and so it's like a whip stabber. What I don't know. It's hard to describe.
And it's a razor sharp metal thing that you don't want to be anywhere near.
Yeah, but it's very threatening and scary, and I think that's sort of really cool about him. But so he takes his contract, he chases his family, has his own adventures, and like you mentioned, this crucial moment where he exercises some sort of morality. But here's what's fascinating to me about it: it only gets him into trouble.
Yeah,
his life falls apart because he has this like. He tries to be a sort of good person. Circumstances happen. He gets fat, out of shape.
Really
his girlfriend dies. He falls apart, and then
his sister also gets killed.
His sister gets killed. The Brand.
Yeah, it's real quick. His sister is the Brand, which she's a freelancer as well. She's badass. She kind of looks like, I don't know, old English. Like that's how she's kind of dressed.
She's got a Tilda Swinton, Rachel Maddow vibe, real hard.
And she has a companion as well. It's this big, like red and black Deadpool, essentially, like Saint Bernard. And his name's Sweet Boy, which I think is adorable. And it shoots tranquilizer darts out of its nose,
out of his nostril. Very cool, very cool move. Yeah,
but she dies because of this girl he saved.
Yes.
Because of the dragon that they needed semen for.
Yes. Yeah, that's hard. Because to do magic, a character, it's probably Gwendolyn, I think. I'd have to go back. But to save him needs a very special ingredient, which is dragon cum.
Yep.
And his sister, the Brand, gets killed on that basis. But again, what's crazy about this is that so he hits rock bottom in some sense because he tried to do the right thing and he went down into that lifestyle.
The right thing.
The right thing. And then, I messed that up. But and then the only way that he can get back to like proper form and not being some schlub is to be his old self again.
Yep.
Which leads him in further conflict with our favorite characters. And should we say where we've left off? Is it?
I mean,
let's say he hurt somebody we care about.
Two people.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. People we care about very much. So it's
like
just
in the same issue.
Absolutely.
One after the other.
Which are cliffhanger.
Yeah.
But I just find it interesting that like in order for the Will to kind of not be this loser.
Yeah, because I mean he's made progress. Or like everybody wants the best out of the characters. They don't want them to be an asshole and stuff. And especially when they're tipping this moral, line, and it's like they go one way, but then all this stuff happens to them and they keep getting down on their luck. And then, they're like, well, the only way I can get back to where I was is to go kill that kid.
And And I want to talk about those themes in a bit, but because I think there's some stuff that Brian K. Vaughan is very much interestingly talking about. But let's talk about a few more characters here, I think.
I'll mention the Upshur and Doff.
Oh, the gay couple?
Yeah, the gay couple. So they're aliens. They work for this tabloid.
Yeah.
And they hear about this, and like their boss is essentially like, well, give me proof or get an interview or something. So like they're after this family, but for a different reason. Yeah, but also to tell their story.
Yeah, that's right.
Like I think with the tabloid they work for, it's kind of a very controversial one because they try to tell the truth and they don't necessarily go one way or the other.
Yeah. It's like, God, I really wish I had in my head the name of that newspaper, that sort of it's like the Enquirer. That's what I mean, where it's like tabloidy, but every once in a while the Enquirer will actually break a real story. Yeah. And it's true. Like every once in a while. But nobody believes it now. Exactly. Yeah. And so very similar. They're kind of that. And it's a writer, like the journalist and his photographer, and they happen to be partners and lovers, and they end up chasing this situation and also becoming part of the family.
Yeah, they fall in love with Hazel. Like I remember they're like kind of interviewing, and like there's a whole part of the story. I won't get into it too much, and they actually like Hazel. Like it was more of a job, and then once they start getting to know the family, they're like, oh, I kind of I like this.
they are this couple is a super smart literary device too. So in world, right, their motivation is they see the significance because this is a world changing event.
Yes.
Right. But I think in terms of the story, they also remind you of the larger world that this is a part of, because a lot of this story, it's really easy to kind of get lost in the fact that it's just this really fun personal adventure with these characters you love. Like, are they going to get killed? Who's going to fall in love? What are they going to do? But then these characters kind of remind you based on like what their job is, that like, oh yeah, the whole political world of the galactic situation is very invested. It really matters. The stakes are very high, what goes on here. And in the meantime, they're also like, I think this is worth mentioning, they're nice.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because one of the most impressive things to me about the character building in this world is, yes, there are some gray characters and we all love our gray characters. We all love our anti-heroes. There are also some straight up
Asshole.
goods and bads that where it's like, and that's in the world too. So like this couple, very nice, very sweet. There's Gus. I don't know.
I was just about to say
that.
I need to talk about him.
Yeah.
Like I have a shirt with his face on it.
It's Gus. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's got an umlaut.
Yeah, it's GHU with an umlaut S. So
yeah.
I just say Goose sometimes, or Gus,
Goose.
depending on how I'm feeling. But he's actually, so they meet him when they go to Quietus, which is a planet that's quiet.
We've all been to Quietus.
Yeah. And so he just becomes a part of kind of like the crew, and like, so Prince Robot's son, Squire, he actually is with him a lot on Quietus, especially when they all get separated. And I love it that he has, so I guess I should say what he is. He's like a bipedal seal man.
He's a seal person.
Yeah, he's like a little tiny, he has to be like 3 feet tall.
He's
maybe.
like Danny DeVito with a seal face.
He's a white seal, and he has like yellow overalls on and a giant axe.
He's like a farmer. And he got the axe is from Bar, right? From I don't want to say too much, but Marco's dad
gives him the bar. Yeah, because they all go there at one point on their trip because of an author that Alana was reading to Marco. Yes. She knew where he was at. Anyway, so they go there because they think it's going to be safe. But I also think it's funny that Gus has like his own little companion called Friendo. Yeah. Which is a giant like walrus.
Yeah, or manatee or something like that.
No, it's a walrus. Is it a walrus? Yeah, okay. It has the tusks and everything. Yeah. But it's not like, I guess, like sentient like he is.
I don't know if this is a real thing, but it's like the goofy Pluto thing. Yeah. Where it's like they're both animals, but one is like an anthropomorphic animal, the other is like more akin to a pet or something like that. And you need some Gus in this story. You need some like, you're just cute and good for the sake of good.
Yeah, well, I mean, whenever they got separated from Hazel, and Alana was trying to convince Prince Robot to help them, because this is right in the beginning of that whole like new friendship and stuff, Goose is the one that actually convinced him. So like, I mean, even like he's played some big parts and stuff like that. He's pretty integral to like the continuing of the plot.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, that's the thing about this series, is that these little characters that you don't think will have importance, or you kind of just skip over them, come back in big ways, or like did something that you recognize later.
It's true. Yeah. So. There's not a lot of waste here. There's not, I mean, like there are some characters that I think are more essentially tied to certain just episodes, if you will, like, and they sort of come in, they're well written, they propel an action or a story, and then they kind of leave, usually because they die or something like that. But you're absolutely right. You'll have some characters that have tremendous significance. I think she's somewhat of a late addition. But Petrichor.
I love Petrichor so much.
Petrichor's amazing.
I talked about her on our LGBTQ episode. She is introduced later. She was in a detention camp. The family I think the grandma and Hazel end up there. And that's where she meets him. And it's a really interesting dynamic to be introduced into the story, because you have, the gay reporters that are in a relationship. Yep. So you're exposed to that. You're exposed to like cross-species interracial relationships.
Yes.
And now you're introduced to transgender characters.
Yes.
And it was such a touching and interesting thing to see in comics. And that's why I love indie comics so much. There's a part where like Hazel's walking around and she ends up in the shower. She's just like walking around. She looks in the shower and Petrichor's there, and she turns around and she sees Petrichor. She assumes she was a woman, but she sees that she still has like male genitals. And she's like, why don't I have that?
Yeah.
So it was like, it's a really innocent and, touching thing for a child to ask. And instead of Petrichor really getting pissed off, she educated her.
Did we mention that Petrichor is of the Wreath?
No, but she is of the Wreath.
Yeah. And they, I can't remember. I'd have to go back, how the Wreath's culture feels about trans people.
They're very much more open.
They were more so. Yeah, so her existence isn't this great.
It's
defiance.
No, she definitely has some I guess struggles.
So it's comparable to our world.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's wonderful that there is this example of a trans person who skirts that line in, I think, a really meaningful way between this is important to their character, and even still, we don't have tremendous trans representation,
right?
But also has an independent character identity outside of that as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's recognized in that aspect. Like Hazel's asking a question that would normally happen, and that's it. Like, it's never mentioned again. Yes. Like, there's some moments where she'll talk about it a little bit. But then, one of my favorite relationships in this entire series, surprisingly, is Prince Robot or Sir Robot and Petrichor.
Yes.
They first start out as like kind of fuck buddies, but then you find out like Prince Robot is like kind of loves her.
It's a sexual relationship that turns into something else. And you can see that, right? I mean, God, it's so well written and interesting because it's sort of like she's been there before. Mm-hmm. This is not her first relationship like that.
And she talks about that. Yeah. And she just didn't assume that she could even fantasize about having those type of feelings for somebody because she was like, well, people just use me. Because I remember another thing with Hazel and her when they first met, when she realizes what Hazel is, she assumes that she's a product of rape because, there's a war and everything like that. So she felt sorry for her and that's when she took her under her wing. But then when she found out she was a product of love, that's why she attached herself to Hazel because she was like, this isn't a thing. Like, that doesn't happen. So I thought, I mean, her character is so complex.
Well, and just the situation, how does this come up? You have something that begins like a deeply racist Nazi SS agent who ends up falling into a sexual relationship with what turns out to be a kind of like militant trans activist. Though she's not an activist for like some sort of like trans community in a political sense within this, but she's just like a person on the right side of history and a badass.
Well, she knows that who she is. There's nothing wrong with her. She knows that this does not hold me back from anything I want to do. She's a kick-ass. Yeah. She'll kill anybody.
She's an old salt too.
Yeah.
Like she's sort of like, she's not like discovering herself. She's been, I don't know, she's like Jamie Schaffner. No one's, we know who that is. Anyway. But yeah, so just a general badass. And, man, it's just so wild.
I mean, there's so much. I mean, I feel like we didn't even really talk about the story, like as far as what's there. I mean, we've been talking about for like an hour already. Like, and like we just now got done with like the main characters. Or whatever.
That's and you really want to read this to just experience the story of it, all the twists and turns and stuff like that. Because the truth is outside of just generally summarizing how it functions, if we were to be like, and then this happens, and this happens, not only would we'd be very excited, it would be like an 8-hour episode.
Yeah, and also we have a purpose in why we talk about the things and the things we don't. Like, we want to get you excited for these things if you haven't, but we don't want to spoil it for you.
Yeah.
Like, I know there's people, Kayla, that don't care about spoilers and like makes me tell her, and I hate doing that. I'm like, no, you have to read it because I can tell you like, oh, this person dies. But like the lead up to it is what matters. It's like, well, that death doesn't mean anything to you if you didn't get yourself invested.
I agree. And it's like so well executed, the story. And like we could sort of just all day sort of just be like, and this is good. Like this element is good. And this aspect of writing is good. But I think what we can talk about now, which would be exciting because we rarely get to do this, is some of the themes that this story really explores. And the reason I mention that is that, again, back to the thing, we can't just talk about writing or art in most characters because it's such a plurality. We talk about Spider-Man. You talk about Batman. There are a few recurrent themes, but you have such a broad
dead family members,
or responsibility or obsession. You certainly get this in different stories, like Frank Miller's Batman or Stan Lee's Spider-Man, for that matter. But in this case, we can, I think, talk about some themes in the story. One thing we've been talking about, I didn't think about this, how important the war is to this whole thing, that in some sense this is a war story. Yeah. And Brian K. Vaughan has a history of this, Pride of Baghdad, if you're aware, where he's, I think, clearly interested in the way that like politics and political situations affect people's personalities and identities and how they deal with it.
Like Paper Girls. I mean, even though it focuses on these kids, it's because there's this big time war going on, and that's how they get looped into all this stuff. I mean, he definitely has a theme. Yeah, he definitely but he's strong at it, and every single story you read by him is so different. Like I was literally reading Paper Girls as I was reading Saga, even though I could tell it was him because of how good it was. Yeah, like I don't care how much I'm gushing about him or whatever.
No, he's wonderful. Yeah,
but it's not similar. It's not similar enough to be like, well, it's just like the same story.
You can feel the same ability voice. Or thing. Yeah, that's great. Same voice, but you don't feel like, oh, this is just one guy who's got one story that he's trying to rehash in different colors. Mm-hmm. I completely agree. From whatever, Why the Last Man, Pride of Baghdad, this, which is whatever.
The funny thing is, I always forget he wrote Why the Last Man. Like I know, but whenever I think back in that story, like when I was reading it, it's so different.
It's in a weird way, even though it's like crazy and outlandish in the event. It feels very grounded.
Yes,
in a way that this
feels like more realistic. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and whereas this like explodes in this panoply of psychedelic color,
fucking insane.
Yeah. But another theme that I see in this a lot, which I really find fascinating, is people who have a certain kind of life that they'd like to live. You look at the family; they just want to have their domestic situation. You look at the Will; he just wants to have his,
peace.
And his
retire.
do his thing, do his thing. And life keeps getting in the way in the most intense sort of crazy circumstances.
Well, I mean, and on that, another like huge theme with this is consequences.
Yeah.
Like everything they do, and like that's another great thing about the story is like one decision they made in the beginning can affect them years later, and won't even know it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, oh wait, that made me remember a character we didn't mention. I think I slightly mentioned her, Isabel. I can't
that's true.
Not mention Isabel. She is a ghost child. That they met on a planet, and
talking about consequences.
Yeah,
I think it was like a mine.
Yeah,
like mines killed her, and so she's this walking.
Yeah, she has
floating.
Like her. Yeah, she floats. She has no legs because she stepped on a mine.
Yeah,
and her like intestines are hanging out. It's a very like kind of not nice image to look at. But she's a kid. But she's been there for years and years and years.
Yeah.
But she ends up kind of befriending Lana, Marco, and Hazel, and she really falls in love with Hazel, and she becomes her babysitter.
Yeah,
while they're like on these missions and stuff like that. And
because magic is in the world, and and it's a very Saga-esque magic because it's not just some broad like undefined. She's a ghost, she's dead, but there are rules to her ghostliness, and it's a very sort of corporeal ghost stuff. Like her body can still be, her ghost body can still be damaged in a sense or whatever. So it's still very fitting. It doesn't feel like it breaks the concept too much.
Yes, yeah. She bonds herself with Hazel because she couldn't leave. Where she was obviously a ghost from. But she bonded with her, like, magic again. She bonded with her, so she has to be connected to Hazel. So, I mean, I would, if I had a kid, I'd love like a ghost babysitter.
A ghost nanny?
Yeah. Because they're like always have to be around them. Yeah. Like they can't leave.
And I think she can't really do much physically, but she can transform her image to scare people and stuff like that.
Yeah, but it does scare people. And a lot of people don't go to that place because they purposely would transform into these things and scare people to get them away from that area.
Yeah.
But, they're not all bad. Yeah. And then she ultimately does pay the price because she could still die. So
double die.
Enter in a character that was in for one issue, this two-headed other freelance bounty hunter, and then stabs her.
What was that character's name?
I don't remember. I just remember being so mad that I just like erased it because I loved Hazel. Like she was a very interesting and original character, and then this fucking.
You mean Isabel?
You
said
Hazel.
I love Hazel. Yeah.
Oh yeah, she's not dead.
Yeah,
hopefully. But
so far as we know.
Yeah, Isabel. And when she died, it was very shocking and out of nowhere. And then the bounty hunters died too. So it was like, oh, that was their only purpose.
Yeah, I think there's something really cool about the way the story handles that kind of stuff because it has a fair amount of both. It has a fair amount of events that are powerful and significant that really do have a lot of build and articulated sort of causes that you see along the way, and then they reach ahead. And then there are just random events where people get murdered or explode or something like that.
Yes.
And you need both. If you don't have both, it feels contrived. You know what I mean? Because the world just sort of works that way. So that's super
and
cool.
because you were talking about like how she works and stuff, she can't be out during the day.
Yeah, that's true.
She's like only a nighttime nanny, which also maybe I wouldn't want that because it's like, no, during the day I would need you.
I like how you're trying to figure out just, would this be good or not? I can't. Yeah.
Sorry, that's the last character I'll add in there. There's just so many characters.
No, it's true. I mean, like we didn't mention a lot of cool stuff, but
I think that's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we could talk about this forever.
Yeah.
We could do a deep dive on each volume if we really wanted to.
Each character.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see. When we run out of ideas, maybe we'll
and there's no way there aren't people doing their like English master's thesis.
Oh God, no.
Like people are doing that.
No, I mean, people have podcasts on like one movie, and they continuously do it. So
absolutely.
I mean, there's tons of stuff we didn't get to. Things obviously we left out on purpose, or forgot, or might have said some things wrong.
That's true.
But I mean, we just love this story so much.
And this is there's a reason that we've never done this before, and this was the first one we did, where we just wanted to talk about one sort of linear, story. And I think that suggests maybe you should read it.
No reading recommendations this week, except for the thing we were just talking about for the past fucking hour.
I'm gonna tell you this: if you listen to this, and you participate with us on social media, I would love for you to send us like panels or descriptions of your favorite moment in Saga thus far.
Yes.
And Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, anything. I'd love to see that because this is like the kind of stuff where it's not just like a story we particularly like. Everybody that really loves comics.
Yeah, I remember
seems to be really into the story.
Yeah, I remember putting like what the teaser was.
Yeah.
Or whatever. I tried to be not specific, but also like just enough.
It was good because it was
because I had Alana in it, but when she was like
the
luchador.
Wrestler. Oh yeah, we forgot about that, but yeah.
Yeah, she becomes a wrestler for a little bit. This is like her mini like midlife mom crisis mode or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I put that and like some other stuff, and like you could tell the people that love this story so much because they just freaked out. Like somebody mentioning Saga.
Yes.
So those people that did that, send us your favorite moments because I think I don't really think anybody has the same favorite moments. Like there's one that everybody like, yeah, that was a good moment. But my favorite moment was with the dragon semen.
Yeah.
So, that's not my favorite moment.
No, I get it. No, but the story is that good that like it doesn't just have one or four good moments. Like you read like Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns or something like that, and you kind of know like like when Batman kicks the shit out of Superman. There are other great moments, but that's going to be like, I agree. There's a lot here. So
all right. Well, Kayla might be back next. No, she'll definitely be back next week.
Yeah. And we look forward to it.
Was it weird without her?
Yeah.
Probably. There wasn't as much like, like laughing or freaking out.
We only did 66% as good as we totally could have.
Maybe. Yeah. All right. We miss you, Kayla.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at the Fantom Zone Pod for more podcast updates.